You've been told a story about criticism. It goes like this. When someone points out a flaw in you, they're giving you information. Useful information. The kind that, if you're honest with yourself and mature enough to receive it without defensiveness, helps you grow. That story is sometimes true, and sometimes, more often than most people realize, it is almost exactly backwards. Because a significant portion of the criticism directed at other people has very little to do with the person being criticized, and almost everything to do with the person doing the criticizing. This is not a fringe theory. It is one of the most well-documented mechanisms in social psychology, and once you understand how it works, precisely, not vaguely, it changes how you receive criticism, how you interpret it, and what you decide to do with it. The mechanism. The psychological term is projection. The basic mechanism is this. The human mind contains things it cannot easily tolerate about itself, qualities, impulses, failures, desires, that produce sufficient internal discomfort to make direct acknowledgement feel impossible. Rather than sit with that discomfort, the mind externalizes it. It finds those same qualities in someone else and responds to them there with the intensity that the internal version would have required if it had been directly confronted. The person who cannot tolerate their own dishonesty becomes acutely sensitive to dishonesty in others. The person ashamed of their own ambition becomes most likely to mock ambition in those around them. The person most afraid of their own laziness becomes a vocal critic of other people's work ethic. The person who has never resolved their own need for control finds control attempts in everyone around them. The criticism in each case may be entirely accurate about the person it's directed at, but its intensity, the particular charge it carries, the frequency with which it returns, the disproportionate emotional energy it generates, comes from somewhere else entirely. It comes from what the critic cannot face in themselves. Why it's so common? Projection operates below the level of conscious awareness. The person doing it is not, in most cases, aware that they're doing it. They genuinely believe their criticism is about you. They experience the discomfort they feel when observing that quality in you as being caused by you, as a reasonable, proportionate response to something external. They do not experience it as a redirection of something internal. This is what makes projection so pervasive and so difficult to identify in real time, because from the outside it looks like ordinary criticism. It uses the vocabulary of ordinary criticism. It arrives with the confidence of someone who believes they're offering an accurate observation. The tell, the thing that distinguishes projection from genuine feedback, is not in the content, it is in the charge. The charge. Genuine feedback has a particular quality to it. It is relatively proportionate. It doesn't return repeatedly to the same point after it's been addressed. It doesn't seem to need you to accept it in order for the person offering it to feel okay. Projection has a different quality. It is disproportionately intense relative to what it's ostensibly about. It returns because the internal source of the discomfort hasn't been resolved. It requires something from you beyond simple acknowledgement, and it tends to be most pointed in the areas where the critic has the most unresolved material of their own. This last element is the most reliable diagnostic. Pay attention to what someone criticizes you for most consistently, most intensely, most disproportionately. Then pay attention to what you know about that person's own relationship with that quality. The overlap is rarely accidental. The person who returns repeatedly to your perceived selfishness is frequently someone with significant unresolved conflict around their own needs, someone who was taught that their needs were too much or not legitimate, and for whom the sight of someone else's needs being met without apology produces an intolerable discomfort that gets directed outward as accusation. The person who consistently mocks your ambition is frequently someone who has abandoned their own. The criticism of yours is the sound of their unfinished business. The person who reads confidence as arrogance is frequently someone for whom occupying space was not safe, and who finds, in someone unwilling to make themselves small, something that simultaneously attracts and enrages. What to do with this information? The temptation, once you understand this mechanism, is to deploy it as a defense, to dismiss all criticism as projection, to hear any negative feedback as a confession about the other person and therefore feel no obligation to consider it. That is a mistake. Not all criticism is projection. Some criticism is accurate, proportionate, and worth receiving with genuine openness. The ability to distinguish between them is one of the more valuable skills in adult life. The distinction is not made by examining who is criticizing you or what you know about their psychology. It is made by examining the criticism itself. Ask yourself, if someone I deeply trusted, someone with no apparent personal stake in this, someone whose judgment I respect, said the same thing to me in the same way, would I hear it as useful information? If yes, consider it seriously, regardless of the source. If no, if the usefulness of the information seems to evaporate when you remove the particular emotional charge the critic brings to it, that charge is worth examining. Not the content, the charge. Because the charge is where the confession lives, the harder implication. There is a harder version of this principle that most people prefer not to examine. If what others criticize in you is frequently a confession about them, then what you criticize in others is frequently a confession about you. The qualities that produce the most intense, most recurring, most disproportionate reactions in you when you observe them in someone else, those are worth sitting with. Not because the reaction is unjustified, but because reactions of that particular quality aimed at other people are frequently most illuminating when turned around. What is it about this quality that produces this response in me? Where do I know this feeling from? What do I carry unresolved that makes this particular thing impossible to observe neutrally? These questions are not comfortable. They are also among the most direct routes to self-understanding that social life provides, because other people, in their criticism of us and in our criticism of them, consistently reflect back the unfinished business that internal examination alone rarely surfaces. So here's the question worth sitting with. Think about the last piece of criticism that landed harder than the situation warranted, that produced more heat than it should have, that you're still thinking about in some form long after the conversation ended. Now ask two questions. First, what do you know about the person who delivered it and their own relationship with the quality they were criticizing in you? Second, what is it about that particular criticism, that specific quality, that produces this particular response in you? The answer to one of those questions tells you something about them. The answer to the other tells you something considerably more useful.